Welcome back to another episode of Raderly Rambling. Dr. Stephen Gundry wrote the book The Plant Paradox, which explains that lectins are a compound commonly found in many foods, which certain people react negatively to, and it contributes in these people to having leaky gut and other problems. The Plant Paradox is one of the best books I've ever read on health, and the list of foods that Gundry says you shouldn't eat lined up perfectly with all of the foods that I had been having trouble with only a few exceptions. This is a pretty long list, including things like cashews, tomatoes, potatoes, lentils, rice. It goes on and on. This list of food, however, lines up so perfectly with people who are referred to as canaries, people who are just highly sensitive to food. Except what's really strange is that canaries also tend to be more sensitive to other things as well, not just food, but also fumes in the air, also sounds, or different colors of light. I'm one of those people who has been sensitive to absolutely everything. I've been sensitive to blue light to the point where I had to get special monitors. I invested over $2,000 in the course of 2 years in changing the monitors and the lighting in my living environment so that I could cope with the light. And that's just light. Believe me, I've been sensitive to a lot more than that. And I'm now coming to understand that this is all due to limbic system impairment. The limbic system is a part of your brain that deals with incoming sensory data and determines whether any of it is a problem. Now, what's interesting is that proteins are what your immune system determines are a problem or not, and lectins are a type of protein. So Gundry proposes that lectins are a problem for humans if they don't have the right flora in their gut to process those lectins. Flora is definitely an important part of the picture. We are designed to contain literally thousands of different species of flora in our gut. However, the average person today only has a few dozen or maybe a couple hundred if they're really lucky. You can learn more about this by reading The Superhuman Organism, which is another fantastic read. For a while, I was thinking that most of my issues had to be flora related based on everything that I was researching. And it is true that during my childhood, I was put on antibiotics repeatedly. It should be noted that there is something known as the brain-gut connection, and so the flora that you have is also influencing your brain, and your brain is also influencing how your flora behave. It is possible that having healthy flora somehow helps protect you from experiencing trauma or being as imprinted upon by trauma. I really don't know. That's a wild theory. If you have any thoughts on it, please comment below. Another great book is Childhood Disrupted. This book discusses the ACE study, or the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. This study found that based on the trauma that you experienced in your childhood, you would experience a proportional amount of disease in your adulthood, sometimes the diseases starting as late as 40 years after the original trauma. The amount of trauma could correlate to being 9 times more likely for an autoimmune disorder or 5 times more likely to get diabetes, irrespective of lifestyle choices. So this means that even if some of these people were smoking and some of them weren't, the likelihood of developing disease was proportional to the childhood trauma, not to the lifestyle choices. What does this mean? This means that the childhood trauma did something to you that causes you to be more predisposed to disease. Now, what it's doing to you is affecting your brain. It's affecting specifically your limbic system, which is what communicates to your hypothalamus to produce stress hormones. Stress hormones are the real root of disease. Now, of course, temporary releases of stress hormone are what we're designed for. A small amount of stress hormone release is intended to help you get out of a tough situation. Say you are sliding down a cliff slope and you need that adrenaline in order to improve your balance and improve basically all of your functions for sensory input temporarily so that you can achieve some miraculous recovery so that you stay upright or you catch that twig that's hanging out of the cliffside and so that you get back up off that cliff and you survive. However, you're not currently sliding down a cliff slope. You shouldn't be having a racing heart rate right now or be short of breath. If you are, that's because your body is inappropriately releasing stress hormones. We're not intended to bathe in stress hormones all day long, but unfortunately, that's exactly what many of us are doing when every thought that we have is negative. You can start to observe how much stress hormone is happening in your body by just simply observing how often you have a negative thought, how often you are judgmental about something, or you're worrying about the future, or you're being critical of yourself. A little over a week ago, I began observing myself very carefully, looking for stress response in myself, and I started realizing that I release stress hormones pretty much all day, every day. Since I stopped doing my positive focus practices many years ago, my thoughts have degraded down to being primarily negative all the time. And it's really not anyone's fault that you end up this way, because unless your brain is incredibly healthy and your lifestyle and environment is incredibly healthy, you are very likely to have negative thoughts all the time, because the news and the media and the people that you're exposed to are very likely doing the exact same thing. And they too are bathing in stress hormones, and they too are suffering from a whole host of health problems. Even right now, I noticed that I've been hyperventilating a little bit. Oops. So what I did in order to calm down just now is I stopped recording and I started taking long, slow, deep breaths. That for me is particularly powerful because it has associations with doing yoga and doing meditation. So it's not only the biological benefit of taking long, slow breaths, but it's also a psychological benefit because it has the association with these positive, calm, relaxing experiences. I knew that yoga helped with my inflammatory pain, but I didn't realize how much it was because of yoga's impact on my mind rather than yoga's impact on stretching and building muscle and getting my circulation up. I developed a practice called perspective alchemy, which is a practice that helps retrain your associations in your mind and helps your mind become more flexible. And I knew that when I did those practices, it seemed to help with virtually everything in my life, but I didn't understand why until I started learning about neurology and learning about how our brain processes sensory information and how it sends hormones to our body based on associations, based on past experiences of what sensory input was correlated with danger. If you're listening to this and you're thinking, whoa, my limbic system is way out of whack, I'm anxious all the time, what do? I do need to let you know that it's not as simple as just thinking positive or just meditating. You actually have to start interrupting that process when it's happening. So when you start noticing yourself becoming anxious, right at that moment, interrupt it. Come up with any positive association for what's happening. Come find a way to take deeper breaths. You can also use things like the emotional freedom technique, which is a technique where you basically tap around the eye area, like on your eyebrows and on your cheekbones, and then you tap around the ears and then on your wrists and, kind of under the arm area. You can look it up. It's called emotional freedom technique or tapping. I learned about it like 8 years ago. And it basically is to interrupt neurological processes. It helps your nervous system recalibrate to a new thought pattern. So combining that with some sort of affirmation or positive focus can really help you reset to a new brain pattern. If you're at all a religious person or you have any sort of avatars that you like to pray to, such as Jesus or Muhammad or Gandhi or Buddha or whomever you like to pray to, prayer is a really good practice for interrupting negative brain patterns. It's not about being, stupidly optimistic to the point that you are unrealistic. It's about retraining your brain to find the good in things. Teal Swan has a practice that she recommends, which is called keeping a positive aspects journal, where every day you write down everything positive that you can think of that happened that day. Every positive sensory experience, things that you smelled that you liked, songs or sounds that you heard that you liked, things that you saw that were beautiful or that you appreciated, any experience that gave you warm and fuzzies. Just write it all down. Another practice, from the law of attraction community is doing something like looking in the mirror and saying positive things to yourself. Marissa Peerce has a technique just called the I am enough affirmation. And this affirmation has been shockingly powerful for a lot of people. It's something that's believable for many people. Like a lot of people, if they look in the mirror and they say, I am beautiful, they don't believe it, which completely negates the power of the affirmation. You have to believe what you're saying. If you don't believe what you're saying, then you're going to fight with yourself internally, even at a subconscious level, and then the affirmation will not have a positive effect. At best, it'll be neutral. So you have to pick something that you can believe in, and I think I am enough is something that people can find evidence for. They can look back and say, well, I did make it through this, or I did accomplish that, and I guess even if it wasn't perfect, it wasn't enough. And if you can just focus on being enough, that often is enough to stop all that chatter that tells you you're inadequate or you're a failure or you have to do it perfectly. And as you can see, I'm back to hyperventilating. So, hey, it takes a lot of practice. You have to keep interrupting yourself over and over again in order to start finding peace. And I can say it's only been a week of retraining my own mind. And in just a week, I've gone from being completely debilitated by a whiff of fabric softener at 20 feet away from me to being able to walk into a room that has many of the clothing that's been washed with these chemicals in the room and stand there and take a deep breath and not get a headache. That's just tremendous change. I mean, absolutely tremendous. I know I have a long way to go. It still takes a lot of focus for me in order to achieve that. But going forward, I'm ecstatic about what this is going to mean for me. And even if you're not a completely highly sensitive person, even if you don't have multiple chemical sensitivities, you do have some limbic system impairment because we all went through childhood trauma. Anytime you basically experience a trigger, the trigger is some sort of sensory stimuli, which could be somebody's tone of voice, or it could be something that you're looking at. And the trigger harkens back to a trauma that you experienced. And when you experience that trigger, you start releasing stress hormones. And if this happens frequently, if you have a lot of triggers, then you're releasing a lot of stress hormones. And these stress hormones could be the reason why maybe you have a chronically tired back, or you have chronically tense muscles, or why you're always tired, or any number of things. It's really freaking incredible. I wish I knew about this a long time ago, and that's why I'm sharing it with you. So if you have any more thoughts or anything to add to this, please comment below. And if you enjoyed listening to me ramble about things, you can subscribe for more rambles. Also, if you're looking for something a little bit more visually interesting, then you can look for anything on my channel that doesn't have the Raderly Rambles tag on it, because the Raderly Rambles are mostly just me rambling without a script, without knowing where I'm going. All right, hope you enjoyed. Catch you next time.